And then we're gonna get started. Peter is also here. Great to have you.
So how often do you do MeasureMasters?
Once a month. And I don't know if you heard about our event Measure Summit, which I do with Chris Mercer together.
Yes.
Yeah, next year we should definitely have you on. That is like kind of the big show in September, but it's a lot of work. So I try to do these once a month to keep people updated. And obviously, there's always something new happening. So it's great to have you or anybody else on there as well. Okay. Yeah. So we are great on time now. It's 5 p.m. Or my time, 5 p.m. So welcome everybody to the MeasureMasters Live Training. It's my pleasure to have you today. Let me see. Here we go. And how this will go down is that we have a guest today who's going to tell us a little bit about something. We'll introduce him in a second here. If you have any questions during or after the presentation, well, during the presentation, we will probably not take too many questions because we need to get through this. But at the same time, if you have questions, you can always raise your hand, use the raise the hand feature. So down below, go to reactions and raise your hand, and then I can pull you up. You are all muted right now, and all the videos are off, hopefully. And then once I let you unmute yourself, you can then talk and also turn on your video if you want to. Or if you are shy, you can also just type in the chat. If there's a question that comes up during the presentation, then just put it into the chat and we'll be able to pick that up later on. All right, then let's get started. Our guest today is Ken Williams. You might know him from Search Discovery. He's the Google business lead there. And 2019, he started working with App Plus Web or interesting in App Plus Web. And then he started a great blog, or during the pandemic, he had a little bit of time on his hands and started a great blog on Google Analytics 4, which you can check out at kenwilliams.com. Should put the link into the chat as well, where he talked all the different notes on Google Analytics 4 and went through everything. That was a great resource for me when I started out in Google Analytics 4, because we all tried to make sense of it during that time. Now, Ken is a seasoned web analyst, 10 years in the industry, so he has a lot of stuff to share. But today he is going to talk about the future of the stuff that's going on in Google. And so without further ado, let's get Ken on stage. Well, you are kind of on stage already. So welcome to the MeasureMaster Group, Ken Williams.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me see if I can share my presentation. Is everybody able to see some slides? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, thank you for the introduction. I actually have a few slides in the beginning that I can now skip over because they were just kind of my background. So I'm going to try little context. My slides are in a they say Marketing Analytics Summit on the bottom there because I recently gave this presentation there. I didn't have time to change that before this one. I gave this presentation twice, or sort of a version of it. And what I love about meeting with a group like this is that this is a topic that is new to all of us. I am evolving over time the more I think about this. And I think of this topic as something that I'm going to throw out and we have a dialogue on, more so than something that I am a expert telling you how you should think, because this is certainly not the case. So basically, quick introduction before I jump into the weeds. Again, as Julian said, my name's Ken Williams. The thing I like to highlight, my title is really unique. I'm called the Google Business Lead at Search Discovery. Basically what that means is I am responsible for our business with Google. So that includes cloud platform and marketing platform. And as part of that, I have to stay really on top of Google products, what Google is doing, what's important to them, how they're talking to clients. And we at my company have a wide range of clients who are coming to us all the time with questions about privacy. How should I think about Google as opposed to other products in the market, such as Adobe products or other smaller players. And it's my job to help companies see that picture and think through that. So that feeds a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm fortunate that I get a lot of insight, I think, into what Google is thinking and doing because I'm in kind of this cool role. So as Julian said, I have a plot here of my free time, and it shot up back early in the pandemic, and that's when I launched a blog. I had been working with GA4, which the time was called the App Plus Web Beta, for a period of time, and was struggling with it. Did a lot of documenting, and turned it into a blog. And so that I hope is a good resource for this group. And I'm always very interested to to hear feedback, to get other people contributing, anything like that. So feel free to leave comments or hit me up on Slack. A lot of people have been really helpful by telling me when things go out of date. So when Analysis Hub was changed to Explorations, if you're familiar with that, I had to go through and update like 30 blog posts, and I still haven't finished that, and things like that. So anyway, super helpful if anyone wants to help me find my mistakes. All right, so today's topic, I'm calling this How Google is Shaping the Future of Measurement, which is a super broad title, and that is intentional, because I think what's happening right now is Google has taken the first step into what is, some people call this a cookieless future. Reality is it's probably not totally cookieless, but a future where we have limited cookies. And they have put out their perspective on how marketers can continue doing their business in this world. I have layered on top of this some of my own thoughts. And so what I'm going to walk you through today is a little bit of the context, why Google made their decisions, and then some of the other thoughts that I have that I think help inform a broader perspective. Okay, so first thing I like to do is just highlight that there are two storms hurtling towards Google right now. They've both been building for a while. And both of these storms have done a lot to inform Google Analytics 4 specifically, but also Google's perspective across products. So the first storm, and this is the smaller storm on the right side of the screen, is this move away from static websites towards single page and mobile applications. So this is the storm that threatens Google's ability to understand how well users are engaging with websites and mobile apps. So my presentation today doesn't go too deep into this, but I do like to point this out. If you were using the last version of Google Analytics, which it's called Universal Analytics, some people now call it GA3. If you had to use that product on a single page or mobile application, you probably found a few roadblocks. The tool was built at a time when single page applications were not the industry standard. So React and Angular were around in very early phases when Universal Analytics was being built. It was not on the mind of the developers. They released a product that then did not handle those situations well. I have a ton to say about that. It is really important, and it does inform a lot of why Google Analytics 4 is different from prior versions. But what I really want to talk about in a lot of depth with this group today is storm number 2, which is this increasing demand for user privacy. So this is the storm that threatens Google's ability to identify an individual user as they navigate the web. And it threatens Google's core business of presenting individuals with personalized advertisements. So This storm has been brewing for at least 10 years. It's been coming at us for a while. But over the past 3, it has gained a lot of speed. Google Analytics 4 just launched a little over a year ago. It was in beta about 15 months before that. And so they were working on Google Analytics 4 as they were watching both of these storms clearly coming towards them. And so Google Analytics 4 has a huge number of features and changes that are specifically designed to help digital marketers and analysts continue working in the middle of these 2 storms. So I don't work for Google. I'm not trying to sell anyone on Google Analytics 4, but the way that I like to talk about it is I think of Google Analytics 4 as a storm shelter for these storms. At least that's the intent that Google had. Now, I do like to also point out Google Analytics 4 solves part of a bigger problem. Google Analytics 4 is an important storm shelter, but it's not really the entire solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in to some specific challenges that Google Analytics 4 addresses. And then I'm also going to point out where Google Analytics 4, and when I say Google Analytics 4, the measuring functionality in floodlight tags and Google Ads that you might use with Campaign Manager or other parts of Google products, they all sort of fall into a similar category that have very similar struggles. So I'm going to talk about what those struggles are, and then where I see alternatives and some area for us to discuss how to think best about them. Okay, so this is a timeline here that just throws out, so I live in the United States, and what I tried to do was highlight what are some of the big announcements around privacy. For me, these might be different than somebody living in Europe. GDPR was huge when it hit here. I worked on site with a client for 2 weeks before it, getting ready for GDPR. So that was a major announcement in the United States as well as Europe. We've also here had California CCPA Act, Colorado passed a Privacy Act in June of this year. Virginia has one that goes into effect in a little over a year. So there's a lot of legislative action that's been going on. And then obviously, there's been a browser race to make privacy part of your marketing position. So Brave and Safari, and to a lesser degree, Mozilla, Firefox, have all 3 come into the market and said, if you care about privacy, you should use our browser because of all of these features that we've rolled out that do a variety of things, one of which is strongly limit first and third-party cookies. The reason I like to show this timeline is just to show you where these black boxes are. The Privacy Sandbox, which is working specifically on Google's ability to target ads to users that are personalized, either because of your affinity interests or because a marketer wants to remarket to you. So that's Flock and Fledge. Those all started in August 2019. And in October 2020, GA4 was released out of beta. So the timeline here is critical because it shows that a lot was going on at the time these things were rolling into the market. And so it's a way for you to see Google's perspective, to see this context that was going on around them. So the thing that the engineers at Google knew was there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. But in order to design an analytics tool that's going to be successful in the future, it needs to have 2 different types of functionality in it. First of all, we need to solve this targeting users problem. That is the the privacy sandbox's focus. And then secondly, we need to understand the impact that users who have restricted cookies or mobile app IDs are having on our websites and apps. Right now, in the pre-Google Analytics 4 days, this was a complete black box. So this includes users who have opted out of cookies in a consent management tool. It could be users who are using a browser that has some type of restrictions being placed on cookies on their behalf. So since November of last year, Safari has been limiting cookie duration, even of first-party cookies. They've been limiting third-party cookies even longer than that. So that's not something that the customer did specific to your website. That was just their choice about what browser to use. Marketers need to be able to answer questions like, how many people fall into these categories, right? Because if you have disabled analytics, you're a black hole to me. I don't know that you exist, right? It kind of depends on how tagging was set up and you know, if you're following all the right rules. But the problem is that it's just a big unknown area, and we don't have a feel for the size of that area. And this causes a lot of challenges with understanding conversions and how conversions should be applied, which leads us to, should I trust the return on investment that I think I'm getting from my marketing campaigns? So that is a super fundamental question that drives Google's business that they've got to figure out a way to answer. There are two methods that an analyst or a marketer can use to answer questions like, what am I getting in exchange for the ad dollars that I'm spending? And those two methods they fall into this is kind of the beginnings of a pie chart, if you can imagine. So attribution and incrementality. So the left side there, attribution, this is what we are familiar with in Google Analytics. Attribution tracks the behavior of individual users for the purpose of distributing credit for conversions across the marketing channels that those users interact with. So attribution is important. It's useful for answering questions like, how well are my campaigns performing relative to one another? It is the same functionality that Google Ads, the Campaign Manager uses, that you need to be able to see quickly how many people are clicking, converting, and make those quick optimization decisions. That all relies on attribution technology. The other half of this chart is incrementality. Incrementality calculates the net increase in conversions that your marketing created above what you would have received with no marketing at all. So to calculate incrementality, you don't actually need to track individual users. Instead, you create test and control groups, usually by geography. Some people do try and do this in cookie-based approaches. Of course, those are now becoming more problematic. But you're basically just tracking changes to your marketing spend and conversions over time. And you're comparing those test and control groups. And what incrementality does is it answers the question, how much value is my business getting in return for my marketing efforts? Which is a more fundamental question. So it's not necessarily the same question that you need when you are in the weeds trying to do an optimization, but it's the more large strategic question that you need to be able to answer when you're looking at the overall value of your marketing program. So Google has been if not the leader in attribution for years. According to a recent blog post from September that I'll show you in just a moment, Google is now working on some level of building incrementality into their reports. So we don't really know much about what that looks like at the moment. But Google has traditionally dominated the left half of this pie chart, and that's where they play. I'm honestly a little bit skeptical that they will ever break out of that totally, but we'll see. So what I want to do today is dig deeper into the left side of this pie chart first, and talk about what Google is doing there, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the right side as well. So you can't really talk about attribution in Google without talking about Google Signals. So I'll do a quick overview of what's going on with Google Signals. This group might be familiar with this, so I'm not going to dwell on it too long. But Google Signals has been around for a while. It's really important to understand because Google Signals is the engine that is pushing Google into the cookieless future. And it's an engine that other analytics platforms are struggling to figure out how to compete with. So Google Signals is this proprietary identity software. It enables Google to recognize users as they navigate across domains, but only if those users meet two criteria. You must be logged into a Google account, and you must have enabled ads personalization. So if you've done those two things, Google knows who you are. That's how they deliver an ad to you when somebody wants to target an ad to a male between the ages of 35 and 45 who's in the market for jeans. What's new in Google Analytics 4 is that Google Signals can be used as your reporting identity. So this can actually provide the identifier that's used to calculate users in your GA4 reports. Again, I'm going to skip through this part a little bit quickly because I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. The only thing I'm going to say here is that traditionally, two versions of Google Analytics ago, for anybody who goes back that far, everyone was identified with a cookie with a random number in it that we call a client ID. With Universal Analytics, you could start passing a user ID for logged in users. And now Google Signals is a third identifier that will overlap with some of your authenticated and unauthenticated users. And it allows Google to then have a small subset of traffic, what might be small, in theory, at least a small subset of traffic on any website that they have high quality, complete data for, that they can estimate has not been fragmented by cookie restrictions. This is important because when you have a small subset of high quality data and a larger population, you can do something that Google is really good at, which is modeling. So this is the fuel behind conversion modeling, which was released in July of this year. And conversion modeling simply is filling the gaps in your data that are created by either cookie restrictions or cross-device behavior. So a user who is logged into Google on their Android phone and they're logged into Google in Chrome on their desktop, they don't have any cookie restrictions, but they're using different devices. Google knows that's the same person. So now Google gives you in your reports in GA4 that same visibility that they've had. What they can also do is use that to calculate the conversions that you're receiving and how they should properly be attributed to marketing channels. So this was the topic of Google Marketing Live back in May. So if you had the opportunity to listen into those sessions, the leaders at Google talked a lot about the way they think about data as fitting into one of two categories. Either you have what's on the left here, this high quality data. It's consented, it's first party data, it's not been fragmented by browser restrictions, which probably means that it's coming from Google Chrome. versus everything else. And everything else should to some degree go through a modeling process to repair the loss that we know is there. So if you're familiar with any supervised machine learning, all this means is if you take a look at, you do your learning based on that high quality data and apply it to the low quality data. So an example of this might be, say that my high quality data is telling me that 20% of conversions should be attributed to Bing ads, but my low quality data only shows 10%. I can infer that we're probably losing that campaign data somewhere between the time the user clicked the ad and when they converted on the site. So what conversion modeling does is it does not change the total number of conversions collected by GA4, but it can change the channels that conversions are attributed to. Now, that's all I'm going to say about conversion modeling. But the reason I gave you all that detail on signals and conversion modeling is because when you pull up an acquisition report in GA4, you're already seeing modeled conversions. There's no toggle to enable or disable conversion modeling. Reports that incorporate modeled data are indistinguishable from any other report, and you don't have the ability to separate it out and view the strictly observed data. So the way that Google is changing the future of measurement in part is by asking us for a lot of trust. So if you were frustrated by reports that used sampling in universal analytics, unfortunately, you're about to get a lot more frustrated. The problem that many of us had with sampling was the assumption that if a report is sampled, it's inaccurate, right? Because it's an estimation. When you look at a conversion report in Google Analytics 4, you're being asked to put your trust in a bunch of things that Google is doing. The foundation is the way that users are identified. So when you enable Google Signals, you can see a network request, fire off to double click, but we don't know what happens after that. There's no way for us to test that Google Signals is working properly. But it needs to work properly because built on top of identification is a second feature that we're being asked to put our trust in: conversion modeling. So when I first released a blog post about conversion modeling a couple months ago, the first comment I got was from a friend who works for Microsoft, asking, how can we be sure that Google is not understating the impact of Bing ads? Well, the truth is, this is not something that's testable. I actually worked on this quite a bit. It's not something that we can validate. Assigning conversions without bias towards Google advertising products is something we have to assume that Google is doing. It's what we're trusting them to do. And they need to be doing it properly because it is providing the foundation for attribution modeling. So all of these things build on top of each other. Any problem with user identification will cause a problem with conversion modeling, which will cause a problem with attribution modeling. And all of this is happening behind a curtain that we can't see or test. So this entire system requires us to put an enormous amount of trust in the engineers at Google. Trust that they designed a product that works, but also trust that they're considering our best interests rather than following any obvious financial incentives. So the thing that I get stuck on when I think about this is that in analytics, trust is really hard to build. We work really difficult. It's a difficult part of our jobs to build trust with marketers so that they can feel confident they can make decisions on our data, which often they don't understand how it's being collected. my role in a lot of companies is a bit of a black box. And rather than having every marketer be an expert in tagging, they've already decided they have to put trust in me. Now I am putting trust in a black box that I can't really see. So the marketing team isn't just asking for your best judgment. They're now having to rely on you, and you're relying on Google. And my belief is that this puts us in a situation where we've got to demand a lot of transparency from Google about what's going on. I have had as I mentioned at the beginning of this, the opportunity to meet a lot of engineers at Google. I work pretty closely with various people in different roles at Google. They're super smart. They solve hard problems. I really think they're the best at what they do. But none of that matters to a marketer who I'm supporting, who doesn't know them and is concerned about this lack of oversight and this trust issue. So that is the reality of using GA4. But before I open it up to questions, I want to cover two other things. I'm moving kind of quickly, I know. The next, I think once we kind of draw this picture that shows how Google Analytics 4 works and what they're asking from us, it's important to next look at, well, if this makes me unhappy, what alternatives do I have? If an analyst needs to measure the performance of a marketing campaign, she can remove Google Analytics 4 and use another tool. My opinion is that this does not eliminate the trust problem. And here's why. Imagine that you're using a different product or an analytics product that you've built that's showing you completely observed conversions. You'll run into three challenges. The first is, how are you going to estimate the impact that cookie restrictions are having on your ability to identify users? This is the same problem that Google Signals solves, but you'd be on your own trying to solve this without the luxury of Google account information, right? So you can try and do this. I know I tried in the past to estimate things like the ratio of users who visited my site from Safari or an iOS device have this type of restriction, so I can apply some multiplier to it. I can guess how many returning users are probably showing up as new users in reports. You can do that kind of thing, but there are a million different browsers out there. All of them are handling privacy differently, and it's not feasible to expect a typical analyst to figure out how to build that estimation on their own. So that's the first problem that you'd have to solve. But you'd also have to solve the conversion modeling problem. You'd have to figure out how, now that I know that where cookies are impacting my data, I'd have to go through and start estimating all of the different reports where that is going to show up and thinking through ways to offset it. We all know that some portion of raw observed conversions will be attributed to a not set marketing channel because they had no campaign or channel information. So you have to come up with some way of reallocating those, or at least a portion of those, because some of those are probably accurately attributed to people who came directly to your site. So this is a hard problem, right? And then you'd have to come up with attribution modeling if your company depends on that. So my point is that an individual can't tackle these problems either. I don't think it's feasible to ask every single analyst to come up with a way to do this. I think it makes a lot more sense to have the product team work on solutions to these problems. Because if you did take that on yourself, you're still asking a marketer for a lot of trust, but they're putting that in you rather than putting that in Google. And in the end, the trust problem hasn't gone away. So Google Analytics 4, just like every analytics tool, every other analytics tool, builds its reports by tracking the behavior of individual users. The only way that we're going to be able to survive the user privacy storm is to build trust in methods that GA4 and other tools use to present us with this aggregated, modeled, and estimated data. So I'm not going to get in that storm shelter if I don't trust that it's going to protect me. So I believe that GA4 is shaping the future of measurement. And all of these features that we've discussed are really innovative. They do go beyond user privacy. They're very forward thinking. But I also think that we need to be super skeptical. We need to demand a lot of transparency. And we really need to force Google to earn our trust and put pressure on them to do that well. Last thing I'm going to hit on that I'm going to open it up for questions is back to this attribution incrementality concept. Google Analytics 4 does not just contain attribution models. It is an attribution tool because it is a tool that is designed to reflect the behavior of individual users. Attribution tools are very important. They give us real-time data that's directional. They're useful for setting benchmarks, identifying your KPIs, measuring progress toward them. But the problem with attribution tools is they require a lot of trust. This has always been true. What I've tried to establish today is that this problem is getting worse, but there's always been a dependency on trust with attribution tools. The alternative, as I mentioned before, is incrementality. And incrementality doesn't attempt to attract individual users. So it doesn't require trust. Incrementality is also predictive. So running a simple A/B test can tell you, if I change X, I expect to see Y. So incrementality is useful for measuring how much value your business is getting in return for marketing efforts. And this is a fundamental question that we've never really been able to answer with attribution. Return on ad spend is not answering that question. So what I like to open up a little bit for discussion is the way that I think of measurement in the future. And I have put together, back to this chart, a way that I think about the dual world of attribution and incrementality working together in 2022 and beyond, which looks like this. And I'm working on this, and if after this conversation, I'll probably get some feedback that has me change it again. So this is where I'm at today. So in the world of measurement, first of all, looking at the left side, on the attribution side, there's two foundational technologies that are becoming important to attribution. I would also just pause here to say, 5 years ago, measurement just meant I know how to use Google Analytics and a tag manager. Nowadays, the two fundamental technologies are server-side tag management and hashed user identifiers. Server-side tag management is important for two reasons. One, so I don't like the idea of saying that, of using server-side tag management as a way to extend cookie duration. It is possible, a lot of people do it. The fact that Safari will limit a cookie to 7 days, but you could just, with a server-side tag manager, say, actually, I want that to last 2 years, is it does benefit an attribution tool, but it is risky because what you're doing is you're going around the wishes of a user who chose to use Safari, potentially because of privacy reasons. And Apple has absolutely every ability to come in and see that you're doing that and stop it in the future. They're not doing that today. But server-side tag management also allows you to open up secure server-to-server connections for passing data. Facebook's conversion API uses this, and Google has a conversion API as well. And server-side tag management is going to be an important sort of foundation for privacy. Not to mention, it has performance benefits. Performance benefits are probably for most people the bigger deal. So server-side tag management I put here is foundational. It's something that in the future I think we're all going to be moving towards. The other item, hashed user IDs, this is something that Google started rolling out in, I think, June, July, something like that, where you can, if you have an authenticated user, pass something like a phone number or an email address or a name, things that are PII. You can pass those only if they've been encoded at least a level of SHA-256. So at that point, that information is not considered personally identifiable, at least according to Google's terms, which means that it can be used to help identify who a user is in the display network, basically. So if Google knows your information from somewhere else, they can run a match against it. So those are the two ways of identifying, sort of strengthening, I think, the foundation of attribution in a privacy safe way. But built on top of both of those is modeled data repair. So this is what I'm getting at with conversion modeling. There's another feature coming soon called behavioral modeling that does the same, where both of these are Google features. Presumably other tools will follow suit. Behavioral modeling will apply similar logic, but to other metrics rather than just conversions. Once you have that done, then you've got aggregated data analysis, right? So aggregated data analysis would be using a tool like Google Analytics to do your analysis. And that tool is only useful because it's sat on top of these other technologies. User analysis, individual user analysis, is more customer data platform type work. So when I've taken my data is not aggregated to like a campaign or a channel or a day, it's aggregated to you. So I have user number 123, and here's what I know about them. They first visited my site 6 months ago, etc. All of that is in the attribution category. The right side is incrementality. In this side, we're doing A/B tests, we're doing brand lift studies, we've got media mix modeling, we've got randomized control trials, which is something that my company's been doing a lot of work in. And all of these things are techniques for answering those big questions. Are we really making a difference, right? Like, what kind of value am I really getting? I put $1 in display. What did that actually do for me? These are things that we always should have been doing, in my opinion. But there are a lot of reasons why digital marketers have not done most of these. Maybe we've done some of them. The biggest being that they're kind of hard. And it's my opinion that in 2022 and beyond, these things are going to become more important, and they're going to become more common tools for us to have in our toolbox as analysts. Okay, so I'm watching the clock. I'm going to pause there. Julian, I'd love to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. Big applause from everybody, I guess, so you can hear it. No. So for me, this was really great. I think at Measure Summit, we had Stefan Hamel talk about, like, we as marketers need to change around our thinking around privacy, that privacy is a thing, and maybe we should do our measurement according to privacy, and privacy is first. So that was like a big mind shift that kind of, for me, I needed to let sink in a little bit as a marketer, that we are not trying to get the workarounds and trying to get a better world by getting through these workarounds, but actually privacy is here to stay. And now what I find interesting in your presentation is really that for me, this whole trust thing, right? Analytics is maybe not about just having this, what we have to let go of is kind of this, okay, this is how it's done, and this is how it's worked all these years, 10 years at least, 15 years. And now we have this new model data world out there, and kind of we need to start trusting these tools, or if you don't trust them, you kind of go under. I guess that's the one world. I always said I want to stay away from the black box, and I don't know what is happening in the black box. So maybe I trust my data more, that I know how it works. But this this is probably something that in the future will not work if I hold on to that kind of belief. So kind of find it interesting that there's so much around this. And the question that maybe I have as the first part is like, who will win this kind of, who will be the future of analytics here? Will this be tools that have the best modeling capabilities, like Google does a lot in AI and in research, obviously? Or is it really the company that can build the biggest trust, right? So when we look at Facebook or Google, who will win the war there? Or who will be the dominating analytics tool? Or is Google's significance going down because they obviously have a bit of a trust issue because people see them as this internet giant? So what is your opinion, trust versus the capability of building actually technology out to have the best modeling?
I love the question because the first time that I presented this, there was somebody from Adobe in the crowd who was like, this is hard for other people to compete with because not everyone has Google signals. But you're right. There is Google has an advantage by their size and by other technologies that they've built. Google also has a disadvantage in the fact that they're not, they have incentives to be dishonest, right? I'm not saying that they're doing that, but they certainly have incentives to. Whereas other companies don't have those incentives and can claim that and can feasibly come out with very clear, transparent approaches that I think that if people feel confident that they understand what someone's doing, that it's giving them, again, the purpose of attribution is not to be perfect, right? The benefit is not to tell me exactly how many conversions did I get for, a certain campaign. That's what incrementality does. There are ways to do really good attribution to help you get real-time, quick feedback for optimization decisions without leveraging Google signals that other companies can do. And I do think that those who come out with a strong, trustworthy value proposition do have a huge chance at pulling market share away from Google.
It's going to be interesting, definitely. I think that the dominance of Google over the years, at least in the small analytics market, could crumble if they do the wrong step. It's kind of like happened with Facebook already, and we'll see how that plays out. So fun times ahead. If you guys have questions who are here in the Zoom meeting, you can raise your hands. I can let you unmute yourself. So just raise your hand and then you can ask your question. We had a question in the chat by Anders. Can you explain how Google consent mode works here? Denial of analytics blocks events. So do any signals get sent, and in case, how?
The question was consent mode, right?
Yeah. So if I, in consent mode, deny the analytics, this blocks events. So do any signals kind of go through, especially when you have Google signals running, or do you know any technical details on that one?
Yeah, so when you enable consent mode, data does still transmit to Google Analytics 4. If you are looking at your developer tools, you can see a parameter is added. I think it's GCM, or GCS, maybe like Google Consent Status set to 100. And that means that this person has denied analytics cookies, but you are still sending data to Google Analytics. What's different is a couple things. No, Google isn't writing any new cookies and they're not reading the cookies that are there. So every time you move to another page, your identifier, that client ID, is different. So if you were to just let this data flow into your reports, every page would look like another user just landed on your website, had a one-page session and then left. So what Google does is they filter all that data out, but they use it in their modeling process. So Google is still receiving those signals. They get a sense for what volume of people are doing this, and then they apply modeling to help you understand overall what is going on my website, even though that previously was just an unknown black hole.
Yeah, but we still need to put the trust into the system, so it's modeled and the data is being taken out later on. Okay. Yeah, it's a tough one, I think, because right now, do you see a lot of companies already using consent mode, the consent mode from Google Analytics and Google Ads? Or do you think it makes the life easier, or is it still something that they're working on, kind of a work on progress? I have had the feeling over the last few months, or yeah.
Yeah, so the thing that I did not see anyone using consent mode until the Google Tag Manager release. So because you can now in bulk apply multiple tags and say all of these need to respect consent mode, that's a lot easier to implement than the old way of having all the exception triggers that everybody was doing. So that, I think, has gotten some adoption. I've rolled it out for like probably 3 or 4 clients in the last like 2 months. So there's some. It's not the standard for sure. Not yet, but maybe it will be slowly become the standard.
Okay. So Anders had a follow-up question here on the GA4. He doesn't see in GA4 the debug panel. If you have analytics blocked, you don't see anything in the analytics debug panel. And is there any way to see that data from signals being sent?
So yeah, if you have trying to think if I have a client who I could pull up their site and show you. So if you're looking, when you say debug panel, you might be talking about debug mode, the debug view report in GA4.
Okay.
If that's what you're talking about, I'm not sure. I would suspect that won't show up.
Yes, that's what he's talking about.
Okay. So I would suspect that's not showing up because anything, basically, in order to enable that report to work, you have to flag your data as I'm using debug mode. And I think that probably having consent mode enabled prevents that. Okay. What you can do, though, to see that data being sent off is use either a proxy like Charles Proxy, or if you are familiar, your Chrome developer tools, and you look at the network, you will see hits being fired to Google, and you can look at that data there.
Okay. Interesting. Might be, yeah, it's interesting to think about it, because it might be also that, I don't know if Google does anything different in Europe than with their codes, just to be safe than in the US. But
that's possible. I don't know. Yeah.
It's a tricky one nowadays. We need to think across borders. It's not always the same thing everywhere. Okay. Anders says, I toggled my implementation and it came on when activated and disappeared when off.
Toggled your implementation, does that mean that you flipped to
consent mode or not?
Yeah. So probably what's going on in that debug view report is when you've enabled consent mode, there's a parameter that's included. I'm pretty sure it's GCS set to 100. That means analytics is denied. That data is being filtered out of GA4 and presumably is probably also filtered out of the debug view report. So that's probably why you're not seeing it. Okay. That's just a guess. I haven't tested that.
It's a bit hard to do the debugging session here on the live stream. Well, Ken, while we are waiting for another question, if somebody has another question, please put them into the chat. Where can people find out more about you? We only have a few minutes left here with Ken. So let us know. What is the best way to reach out or to see more of your stuff that you come up with?
Yeah, I mean, I've got my blog. I send a monthly newsletter with updates, everything that's going on. I'm probably over the holidays going to migrate my blog off of WordPress. So if everything goes down for a little while, that's what's going on. So definitely connect with me there. I'm on the Measure Slack. If anyone goes to measure.chat or join.measure.chat. I'm not in there as much these days as I used to be, but you can message me. I'm at Ken Willie. I'm also at Twitter at Ken Willie. And the next conference I'll be at is in Europe. Assuming Omicron doesn't prevent any travel, I'll be at Super Week in Hungary.
Nice.
As well. So maybe we can catch up there if anyone's planning to be there.
Cool. All right. I don't see any more questions here. I think that does it for today. And we are right on time because we have another meeting. So I want to be respectful of this. Ken, it was so great that you joined us. Thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to hear more and read more from you on your blog. And you also going to come back at some point to teach us a little bit more, maybe at Measure Summit 2022, if that will happen. Yeah. So thank you very much, Ken. And yeah, everybody else, you guys have a great day, and till next time, I guess. Yeah, that's awesome. Officially the over.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody. Well, I will not change the meeting. Great. Okay, Ken, this was great. I want to let you go, conscious of your time. So thank you very much, and I will follow up with another email tomorrow probably with some information. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Julian. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.